Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our final live session for Amplify DU. Excited to be here with the founder of the Amplify program, Hayden Ron. So we're excited to have him here. I know we heard from Hayden in session one, but we have an opportunity to talk about specifically some follow-up materials and items that were covered like this summer at some of our other educational programs. So that is the main focus today. We talk about that is follow-up from LI, and then how do you make sure that you are best prepared from all of the great best practices that we covered at Leadership Institute with the plethora of recruitment training programs for all of the attendees. I realize that some of you might have attended, but if not, for any of the people that did attend LI and are watching this, the recorded version of this is definitely some follow-up materials from LI. So once again, I'm Dominic Green, Senior Director of Chapter Development for DU, and I am a member of the Oregon chapter. And I'm currently in Knoxville, Tennessee, assisting with recruitment. So recruitment is the front of my mind because I've spent the last couple of days outside in sweaty Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'm excited to be here. But it's actually been a lot of fun, and the guys have done really well so far this fall. So I'm excited to be talking more about recruitment with one of my favorite people. So Hayden, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. Hey, everyone. Good to see some familiar names and see some names that were at LI, which is always fun. Hayden Ron, Oregon 16, coming to you from California, Southern California. I move a lot, so if you've been on enough webinars, you know that I go back and forth between the Portland area and Southern California. However, my wife and I and our little one, Scout, who started preschool today, she had a great first day. We're back down in Southern California. Always excited to talk about recruitment. I got really energized in working with Mark Gierke and Jacob Ellis on Recruitment Symposium and our session at the Leadership Institute. So really excited to do some follow-up there. Currently do reunion programming for the University of California, Irvine. So I continue to use my recruitment skills in getting alumni recruited to serve on committees, serve as class coordinators, and really recruit folks to actually attend reunions and get them back engaged with the institution. So really excited to be with one of my favorite people, Dominic, talking recruitment tonight.
Go Anteaters. All right. So what we're going to do is specifically, we have a couple main areas of follow-up pieces. So we're going to have an opportunity. So those of you who attended LI, or if you didn't attend LI, great opportunities to just really focus on what really one of the first topic will be, what are the main areas vital to success in the recruitment process. So really want to talk offer opportunity for Hayden to kind of share some of the thoughts and conversations and what we covered at LI, but kind of how can they take that information that they learned at LI and practically take it home to make sure it works for their chapters. So Hayden, what are those main
Yeah.
areas to success?
Yeah. So, and again, if you're at LI, as Dominic said, there'll be some repeat information, but probably also new information, as there's a lot that we weren't able to cover over our day and a half, 2 days in Atlanta. I think first and foremost, it's really understanding who your chapter is and aligning your chapter with each other. So really understanding what do you have to offer as a chapter of Delta Upsilon on your campus. Yes, all Delta Upsilon chapters are going to offer our 4 founding principles, this mission of building better men, but really diving into who are we as a chapter at Tennessee, at Oregon State, at San Jose, at Western Illinois, and understanding, okay, how are we defining that? And then ultimately, what are we doing that's showcasing the chapter that we want to be for our potential new members? And so I think one thing that's really helpful for all chapters, specifically if you are helping with recruitment, if you are the VP of recruitment, if you are an advisor for recruitment, it's really sitting down and taking an audit of what your chapter does, where you want your chapter to be, and how does that look in a recruitment kind of week or time frame. So if we're saying that we want to be a group that's really community focused, or we want to be a group that's really focused on academics, or we have a very, strong brotherhood, we're very inclusive. We have to then look at what we're actually doing as a chapter And then is that being mirrored within how we're recruiting individuals? And what you find sometimes is that that's not always the case. Sometimes you're either not utilizing and maximizing what you're already doing to recruit individuals that are actually going to help um, get P&Ms interested, or you're doing things that your chapter typically doesn't do. And then let's say Dominic joins because he had a great recruitment week. Um, you know, 3 weeks into the new member process, he may come up to me and say, Hayden, none of what I thought this was going to be and what I was told during recruitment and what I experienced during recruitment is what you guys actually do. So really important to really take that audit and then think about how we're sharing that with potential new members and how we're showcasing that with potential new members, because I think both those are super important there. The other piece is understanding who is my target audience and where am I finding my potential new members. Far too often, chapters are solely relying on IFC lists, and IFC lists are only a portion of your potential new members on a campus because not everyone is going to sign up for IFC recruitment. It's the way that, if we're going to go on a campus for expansion, yes, we're going to utilize an IFC list, but we're also going to utilize other resources or other individuals, right? We're going to ask our friends who are in sororities. We're going to find different clubs and organizations. We're going to see if we can partner with different offices on campus. We are going to be smart about where we're potentially tabling or how we're getting out there and finding the potential new members, maybe first year students within residence halls or dining. So all those individuals are out there, and if all we're doing is relying on IFC formal recruitment lists or informal lists that sometimes are good, sometimes aren't, sometimes we don't get that, then we're not going to be as successful as we can be. And so we need to tap into these other pockets and other areas. In a lot of ways, chapters who are successful also identify what type of individual they're wanting to bring into the chapter and then narrowing down where they could potentially go find those individuals. So if we're saying, hey, we really want to be a top 3 chapter academically every semester, a chapter is going to go to the honors college and really kind of figure out how do I go potentially recruit honors students and really help them understand how Delta Upsilon can excel, themselves both in the honors college and academically, but also, socially with the organization. If we're thinking about an organization or a chapter who's saying, hey, we really want to be community focused with a lot of community service and involvement, we're going to go to these different clubs and organizations that may have that focus, right? So if I'm on a campus and I know there's a Rotaract Club, which is the college version of Rotary, I automatically know that those students in that club are very community focused and community minded. And so being able to tap into that is really helpful. The other one that I've seen chapters do, and Dominic and I've probably done this on expansion countless times, is those like professional business organizations or like spirit groups. My first expansion at Texas, having the realization that there were spirit organizations for specific like sports teams or different things that were happening at UT, and that you could be both part of a fraternity and a spirit organization. We were like, great, we're going to start making presentations or start building relationships with those organizations because there's bound to be guys who are going to want to be interested in both. And luck would have it, that was the case. And so we were able to find guys who weren't affiliated yet, who wanted kind of both the fraternal experience and the spirit organization experience. And so we were able to be successful in that piece. So those are really the first 2 that come to mind. Dominic, any thoughts on either 2
Yeah,
or anything to add?
no, I think, and I think we had talked about this maybe prior sessions, but I do think as someone who used to run an involvement office, it's really important to think about what organizations do freshmen join, right? Like where are they joining? Like often like you said, it could be a spirit group. It could be a religious organization. It could be, there are a lot of campuses when I worked at Northwestern, there were actually specific leadership organizations for freshmen as part of the orientation process, right? So there was captured a pre-orientation or orientation process that literally there was an outdoor adventure like leadership pre-orientation program. There was like an actual leadership building program, and then there was a service learning program. But all 3 areas, the chapters that did really well in recruitment had people strategically in those organizations as counselors, as people running those organizations. So they're being strategic. So not only recruiting out of those, but how can we get involved and engaged and intertwined with those organizations that become, especially organizations like that really line up with our values, right? And really line up with our principles. Like, what are we looking for? And, obviously GSI and building better men is a big part of who we are. So what organizations are building better men on campus already? And how can we tap into that? So a lot of chapters have some type of mandatory requirement of everyone needs to get involved in something else outside of DU. The whole mandatory thing, we could talk about that. That's a whole nother webinar we can go back and forth on, but I do think it's important that it's highly encouraged that guys get involved outside of DU, because that expands your bubble, not only your friend bubble, but it also expands the opportunities to meet potential new members in these organizations, especially if they line up with what we're looking for, as Hayden already mentioned before. Is if we're identifying the stuff, then literally these are areas that we can go out and find these people.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great points, Dominic. I think the other piece that's incredibly important, and if you've or if you've been on a webinar with me, if you've spoken to me about recruitment, you've heard this before, it's preparing your chapter and your members to have the right conversations, to engage in the right way, and to know their role within the larger scope of recruitment. So I think the most successful chapters are the ones who are preparing their chapter members on all of those areas, right? What are the conversations that we're having? Here's a cheat sheet of questions if you get stuck on how to, the conversation goes dry. Here's kind of the next steps, whatever that might be. Here's what your role is specifically at this event or during this week. Dominic has the great story where, he was recruited, somebody, got him to the house, and then somebody recruited him in the house, right? Like there's people who can get you through the door, and there's the people in your chapter who are really good at really building those genuine connections, and you identifying that for them and helping them understand that is really helpful. Seniors, I get this question all the time. What do we do with our seniors? Seniors can be really valuable in terms of sharing their experience within the chapter. I always tell individuals who ask me that, hey, if there's a freshman who wants to do X, and a senior had a similar trajectory in his not even chapter, but even just schooling, reach out to that senior and say, hey, I really need you to help me go to this lunch, go to this dinner, come with me to really talk through this with a P&M, because that senior will want to talk about their experience and feel like they're, hey, this was my path moving forward, and it helps them feel like they actually have a connection to the chapter still, because we hear that all the time. I think, Dominic, we've talked about this plenty of times of
Yes.
how do I engage older members? That's a great way to do that on that piece. And I think the last piece when preparing your members, it's helping them understand how do you take that last and final step in talking about potentially joining the organization, right? How do you get somebody excited to, potentially accept a bid if that's what the chapter is going to provide that individual? And then how are we responding to some of those reservations or hesitations to joining, and helping guys understand, okay, here's how you respond to that. How does that process look for you all? And I think sometimes chapters can get caught up in the, Chris is great, we want to give him a bid, but we really don't know what that next step is, or we haven't practiced or worked on understanding how to close the deal. And so putting that work in, and whether you're, again, the VP of recruitment or you're an advisor, right? Like a lot of it sometimes is the role play, which the first couple times is super uncomfortable because you're just not used to it. But it's incredibly helpful, right? It's incredibly helpful to say, Dominic, you and I are going to role play. I'll be the VP of recruitment. You be the P&M. I'm going to extend the bid. Chris, do you mind watching us and providing feedback? And then after 3-4 times I do it, I've kind of got it down a little bit. I feel more comfortable, and I'd rather make the mistake with Dominic than make the mistake with Shane. And then Shane's kind of like, oh, I'm not too sure. That was kind of awkward. Like, did he really give me a bid? Did he not? He said this thing. Where if I was able to practice that with Dominic and Chris give me that feedback ahead of time, that's super helpful. And so again, I always encourage chapters. I know Mark talked about this in the recruitment symposium. Incredibly important to understand, like, how do I close that deal, and how do I take that guy from a like, hey, you're interested, we're interested. Now let's get you excited about accepting that bid.
Absolutely. No, and that's that. Yeah, I echo everything because that is where your older members can really be beneficial and helpful, and that's how I was used as a senior, and often that individual outreach to specific seniors who say, because you might meet a potential member and you're like, wow, this guy is, Hayden Jr. Like, we need Hayden to come to lunch with me to sell this guy because this guy's wants to do everything Hayden has done at U of O for the last 4 years, right? So how do we get Hayden there to really be able to share what that pathway looked like and how the fraternity can help him fill all of his goals when he's at the University of Texas or if he's at Purdue, right? So I think those are really important steps. So Hayden, I've just been doing some uh, minutes of your conversations and all the key highlights. So for those of you that are watching this in a recorded session, you'll see all the main highlights and points, and specifically highlights and things that you need to think about when you're taking this back to your chapter, right? Because a lot of these sessions are designed where we really want you to make sure you're going back to your recruitment committee, going back and having these conversations at the chapter level as well. So, so you feel prepared, because I will say this is that what I've seen in the last year at Tennessee on how preparation and a strategy going into recruitment has drastically changed return rates and retention rates in the formal recruitment process. Tennessee has 1,200 people going through recruitment, right? So, but they've seen the highest return rates this in 2024 because they actually had a strategy. They knew what they were doing every day. Everyone had a role every day, but they know they have a very specific game plan for each day of recruitment and how they're going to approach it, but also just what does it look like? And while it's not rocket science, but what does it look like to actually talk to people in the recruitment process, right? I think the amount of times you go to a chapter, and I saw this when I was going through recruitment myself, is you go to another chapter and no one is talking to you, right? There's 6 or 7 guys doing the recruiting, and then there's a bunch of dudes hanging out in the background, and no one is actually talking to potential new members, right? The stories I've seen multiple times, I've heard horror stories of like where you walk into a chapter and the P&Ms are on one side of the room eating Chipotle, and then the members on the other side of the room eating Chipotle, and no one is talking to each other, right? So this is where we need to make sure that people feel comfortable talking, but also what do you talk about, but also like what kind of game plan is there in place? And and often I think in the recruitment process, the VP recruitment, if we have some VP recruitments for people, high recruitment folks on this call right now, is how are you quarterbacking the process, right? To be able to say like, hey, these 3 PNMs just walked into the door a little late. Who's going to talk to them, or who's going to tell them, hey, go talk to Chris because Chris has an opening right there, right? So how do we connect people to make sure they feel comfortable? As everything Hayden said, we want them to feel comfortable. We want to help them feel engaged. And what does that look like? And I've seen it front and center right here the last couple of days, right here on campus. So cool. Hayden, any other things, or do you want to move on to the next area?
I think the only last thing, I think be careful. To Dominic's point, there's the end of one side where it's nobody's talking to anyone, and then there's all the chapters doing is talking at the P&M. So I think that's again where that training is really
Correct.
helpful. Yeah. When I was going through my interest in joining a fraternity at Oregon, I can clearly remember going to a lunch with the VP of recruitment, my friend who had referred me, and we had an hour lunch, and I think I talked for maybe 10 minutes because all the VP of recruitment wanted to do was talk at me. The next day, I had a coffee meeting with Mark out of all people. And again, for those who know, Mark was the one who recruited me into DU. And over that kind of 30, 45 minutes, I think I talked for 30 of it, right? And so it was the clear, like Mark knew exactly the questions he was asking, and it was way more conversational, and it felt like I had an active role in what in that conversation than just, oh, like you're just trying to tell me what the organization is and that you think that's going to interest me. So I think the balance there, stay clear of those two ends. What's that balance of how do we have that conversation? So I think that would be my only other note. Yeah.
I think that 80-20 rule, right? Where they should be talking 80% of the time, and we're just there to ask questions and follow-up questions and follow-up questions and follow-up questions, right? So to get them really interested and to be able to answer their questions too, right? So obviously we can start the conversation, but often we all know that people like talking about themselves. But if we ask the right open-ended questions, they can talk and talk and talk and talk, right? So good key points to think about. Perfect. All right, let's move on. All right, so we talked about this, but how do we create an engaging experience? So really, we've already kind of covered some of this stuff, Hayden, but what does this look like to create that experience where there's maximum engagement from the chapter side and the PNMs feel comfortable, but how do we create that, strike that balance so everyone is at a good place where there's two-way conversations, and we don't go to the opposite ends of no one talk to them or there's too much talking, right? So what does that look like?
Yeah, so I think a few different pieces, and I think there's another slide that will kind of go through engaging. So you'll probably see this again at some level. I think first and foremost, you need to create events that are set up to have conversation. I think there are really fun ideas that chapters can have that necessarily are not good recruitment events. And then there's really fun ideas that the chapter is like, oh, I'm not too sure about that, but are really great recruitment events. So one of actually our most successful recruitment events at Oregon was a kickball game. Why is kickball a great recruitment event? Because what are you doing 90% of the time? You're standing around talking to one another, waiting to play kickball, and everyone likes to be in fifth grade again, right? Like there's this fun nature of it, and we were smart enough to be like, okay, who's on what team, and we knew what P&Ms were coming, and we knew what guys needed to be connected with them, and we prepped the chapter ahead of time, and we're getting 30 40 P&Ms at this kickball game on a Tuesday evening, because it's fun and we're able to really be smart about what that looks like, right? I think as well, thinking about what are those events that are engaging that other chapters aren't doing. So it's Wednesday night, so of course we're gonna have a Wing Wednesday. Well, yeah, so is the other 5 chapters. And if all you're doing is eating wings and watching football, that's not necessarily engaging, right? It's engaging and like everyone's kind of hanging out and being brothers and whatnot. But what more are you doing that's going to create that better experience for the PNM? So that when they come to I'm not saying don't have a Wing Wednesday. I'm just saying what are those other things you're doing that are engaging with that Wing Wednesday piece there. And I think lastly, really to provide engaging experience is communication, right? Like communicate when the event is. If they have questions, who the PNM can talk to, where the event is. If a PNM needs a ride to the event, you're offering that. If a PNM doesn't, if your house is kind of hard to find, I know I've worked with some chapters where they're like, you could pass it, or it's kind of like a little bit off campus. Hey, like we're gonna come meet you on campus, and we're gonna walk together to the chapter house as a group, right? And that's providing time for conversation and engagement, um, talking and communicating about what the next event's going to look like, right? Or what that next engagement opportunity is going to look like, right? And so it allows for this engagement of like, oh, there's a lot of things I can do, a lot of things I can get involved with. The chapter's communicating with me. They're helping me through this process. The amount of times that I was on an expansion and that was the feedback from a potential new member that was like, thank you for communicating with me. Like I didn't know where I was going or I wasn't quite sure. It was more than I was expecting as a consultant. And so that really helped kind of solidify this, these guys who are going through recruitment, it can be scary for them, help them through that process, and just communicate as much as you can. And that's going to engage them and that's going to make them feel welcomed and make them feel like, yes, I can ask questions and yes, I can, have a conversation with folks there.
And quick question: can we give some examples of maybe what a non-engaging event looks like? I'm just thinking like movie
Sure.
night, like a movie
Yeah.
night, a
Yeah.
movie
Yeah.
night where
Yeah.
everyone is watching a movie and or watching a TV show and no one wants anyone to talk. They're like, "Shut up,
Yeah.
Hayden! Like, don't talk."
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what other
Yeah.
types of events have you seen maybe not work out as well, or maybe chapters might struggle because people don't talk to each other?
Yeah. I think movie nights is a great example of that, right? Again, because it doesn't create that much conversation. I really do think, and I understand, you have like, Sunday night football, Monday night football. I think those are great events. But if that's all you're doing, it's similar to a movie night. Some people are just going to be so focused on the game. And I think from an engagement standpoint, if you're not prepared for it, all you're doing is talking about what's happening in the game and not really understanding, who Dominic is, who Chris is, having that conversation. And I think chapters can kind of get lulled into this like, well, this is fun and engaging. And then after the fact, I'll go, hey, Dominic, what do you know about Chris? And you're like, well, he liked the interception that happened in the third quarter, right? Well, how is that going to help me understand if Chris should become a member of DU? So I think that's one of those pieces there. I think any kind of thing where you're spread out, right? Like that's not creating space for engagement there. So if you're like, hey, we're gonna go have a spike ball event. Well, that's only 4 people. Like, what are other people doing? Are we just watching people do spike ball? Like, that doesn't really kind of make sense there. I think too, anything if you're gonna be like, hey, we're gonna have an event at the chapter house. I was just actually talking to a group about this at LI, where it was okay, like you're centering the event around a bonfire, which is awesome because that can create a lot of engagement opportunity. But if that's all you're doing, that may not be the most engaging experience. So how are you providing other experiences or engagement opportunities at that bonfire event, right? So if the bonfire is at a house, cool, I've got a bonfire outside. Maybe guys are inside playing video games for those that like that. Maybe some guys are, grilling hot dogs depending on the time of the day. Maybe so it's providing different opportunities. If I have a chapter house, I'm ensuring like guys are giving house tours, right? And having that opportunity. And so I'm utilizing my space and utilizing my ability to engage in different ways. So if Chris is like, hey, thanks for having me at the bonfire. It's like my jam for an hour. I'm just going to go back to my dorm room and, more than likely because of conversation I've had with Chris, I know Chris is going to go back to his dorm room and like turn on the Xbox and see if he can win the college football playoff in NCAA 25, right? Which is what I'm currently trying to do with my Troy Trojans. I might say, hey, Chris, I've got an Xbox right inside. Do you want to go inside and play with some other guys? Because the bond, totally understand there, right? Like Chris might be like, totally, yeah, that'd be fun, right? But if I'm not in that mindset, then again, that event is good, but how do I up level that to a place where like Chris is now staying for the next couple of hours?
Yeah. And I think it's just good to make sure that people are paying attention to that stuff, making sure that no one gets left behind, as I mentioned on that previous slide. But one more, I'll say, I think it's great to take guys to athletic events. However, maybe it's hard if everyone is in one row at a Mariners game. You really can only talk to the person to your left and your right. So unless you were getting up and talking like at the concession stands, like you often just get to talk to 1 or 2 people and your chapter just bought 25 tickets, right? So just something to think about is how do you mix it up? How do you make sure brothers are mixing around? I do think chapters need to be super strategic and thinking about how, this is something that was taught to me when I was in school and I taught this to other chapters, is when you have a process, especially if it looks a little more formal, how do you make sure that everyone the guys in the room have quality conversations, but are trying to meet as many guys as possible throughout the day. So, or through that event, right? So I'm thinking at Tennessee. So the strategy is, hey, you want to have a really engaging conversation for 5 to 10 minutes, and then being able to say, hey, let me introduce you to Nick, and then talk to Nick, and then you can move on to meet someone else, right? So you're moving around and making sure the people. So if you are in a more sterile or more of a stuck setting like a baseball game, you're creating opportunities to move around and making sure that guys are getting to meet as many guys as possible. So just something to think about is keep as engaging as possible, but also just think about that someone there needs to be thinking about like, hey, how do we make sure we're mixing this up so that the guy doesn't only talk to one person, right? Or he only doesn't. So make sure he doesn't just talk to his roommate, who he already knows, because so that's great because he's like his roommate. We invited this guy because he's roommates with one of our current P&M, one of our current associate members, but he's also not meeting new people, right? So just think about that, especially
Yeah.
in the informal process, which we'll talk about in a second,
Yeah.
and what that looks like. So perfect.
Yeah, Dominic, two more things as you were
Yeah.
talking that came to mind. I think number one is you have to remind yourself that you are recruiting the P&M. So do not expect the P&M to come up to you, right? Like if Chris comes to an event, I need to be the initiator in that conversation, right? Chris might initiate it, right? But I think sometimes chapters are like, oh, well, they need to, come up to me and, oh, he didn't really initiate anything. Well, yeah, like that may not always be the case, but remember, like you're the one recruiting. And so you're the one who needs to go up, introduce yourself, and start that conversation. I think the second piece to that is if you're having an event, ensure that you have one guy, two guys, three guys, however many, depending on what the event is and how many P&Ms you're expecting, to ensure that as P&Ms are coming in, they are being welcomed and they kind of are having that initial conversation. I have worked with chapters and have had the conversation of like, hey, if you're not welcoming them into the event or into the chapter house, they're going to walk in and awkwardly kind of look around and not have a great start to that experience, right? And then there's going to be the guys in the corner who are like, is that a P&M? Is that like a new member? I don't know who that is, right? And so we need to just be very active in, hey, welcome. Hey, Chris, welcome, man. Like, we got a few things going on. How's your day been? Right? Like, well, great to have you here. Here's what we got going. Have you met Dominic yet? Right? Like, Dominic actually is from, learn that you two are actually from like 30 minutes away from each other. So we'll connect you two there. If you've got any questions, let me know. Those type of things. Hey, Chris, have you met, uh, Jack, who's who's another P&M. Actually, you two, I think, have the same major. Just learned. Let me connect you with him, right? Instead of like, Chris, you walk through the door and then 5 minutes later, I'm finally being like, what's up, dude? Like, welcome to the event. Like we got some dogs going on and like enjoy the bonfire, right? Like, Chris, which one would you feel more engaged with? Probably like the first option, right? You'd be like, oh, cool. Like that feels a little bit more engaging. The second option, you'd be like, that's, yeah, that's kind of like more brilliant, dude, but it's like not necessarily going to sell me or not even, or like get me excited to join the chapter.
Perfect. No, I 100% agree. The more, as Hayden already said, the more you practice, 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 practice. And as I mentioned this last week in our Train the Trainer webinar, that one of the, and I walked into a chapter like this. This was not my original idea, but we did a lot of our recruitment training continuously at chapter meetings. The VP recruitment's report was often role playing, or I'm going to throw a scenario to the entire chapter. Half the room does this, half the room this. So continue to practice, 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 practice. And it was super helpful for us as we were always kind of ready to meet guys or meet potential new members, especially people who are bringing their friends over, their roommates over, guys from class, things like that. So perfect. All right. Let's talk about best practices. We have a few on the page, Hayden, but we want to make sure we've talked a lot about engaging our members, but really thinking about all the other ways that chapters can, obviously we talked a lot about preparation today and engaging our members and having good conversations. But what are other best practices that they can focus on as they
Yeah.
get ready for this fall?
Yeah. So I think two that probably are on here that we haven't necessarily talked about. First one is focusing on what you can control. There's a lot to recruitment. And I said this at LI, like recruitment is hard. Recruitment's also a lot of fun. And there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of things that you can get dragged into that you just can't control. The amount of times that chapters have like shared with Dominic and I, hey, IFC, still has not confirmed when the IFC tabling event is. Okay, there's only so much I can do to control that as a VP of recruitment, but what I can control is going ahead and making sure that when that is confirmed, my guys are prepared to be there and prepared to engage. Right. If I'm not doing that and all I'm doing is, hey, we can't do anything until we know when the date is, like that's actually not where the energy needs to be. Energy is, hey, we don't know when the date is. It's annoying, it's frustrating, we're working on it, but here's what we can do. So when we know the date actually happens, we're ready for it. Hey, IFC doesn't have, the recruitment list ready. They said they were going to have it ready today. It won't be ready till Friday. We can't do anything. Well, what are you doing with guys who aren't on the list, right? What are other guys that you've talking to, or that you have kind of lined up, right? Like, I can control reaching out to them and having conversations with them while still waiting for that IFC list, while the president or the advisor or the VP of recruitment is working on that with IFC. Um, one of the best piece of advice I ever got was, man, 5 guys who told me they were going to be at this dinner didn't show up, and the focus now is on the 5 guys who didn't show up instead of the 7 guys who did, right? And so it's like, I'm so bummed that these 5 didn't, that it's taking away from the 7 who did and their experience, right? It's like, I can't control that they didn't show up, but I can control how I'm interacting with these 7, right? So it's all about what I can control. I can control how you prep, how you prepare your members, how you show up to events, how you follow up, how you communicate, how you extend bids. Like, a lot of those things you can't control. And so don't get bogged down by what you can't control. If there's things that need to be followed up with, let the appropriate people do that. Let, your advisor do that. Let your president do that. If it's you as the VP of recruitment, do that. But you're now delegating to your recruitment committee, here's what we need to be doing while I'm taking care of this, instead of just kind of sitting around and not doing anything until, the thing that we don't really have control over gets taken care of, which sometimes can take a while, I think, as we all know on this call. Dominic,
And
anything to add to that?
yeah,
Yeah.
I was thinking a little bit of a different way of thinking of what you can control is also when I think some chapters also recruit like deficit recruit. Like, I know we're not the biggest chapter. I know we don't have the nicest house. I know, there's there, and then that could help, but there's a lot of things where there might not be um, the building blocks are not there, and you feel like that is really going to hurt you in the recruitment process. But really, how can you focus on what you can control about what you do have that's working, right? How do we focus on the positives and the things you can control, as opposed to very much starting every conversation with, hey, I know we're a small chapter yet, but or just saying, hey, we're a small chapter, like, period. I've seen it go both ways, but I don't know what you've seen that, Hayden, too. Is I think sometimes chapters focus so much on, because they feel like they feel like they're just, it is a sometimes, like I said, we realize recruitment's a competition with other chapters you're cross recruiting with. We don't want to get in that mindset of like, well, they're talking negative things about us because of these things that we feel are such a huge negative, that they don't know, that the chapter doesn't know how to overcome them, because they feel like that no one would want to join because of these negative things that they're focusing on. But how do we focus on what you can control, and how do we focus on the things that are going well? So I don't know what you saw on the road, Hayden, because
Yeah.
you were with us for 5.5 years, but I
Yeah.
still see that today in 2024. Chapters start every conversation with a deficit of like,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, or they start every conversation with an apology. And the P&M
Mm-hmm.
is like, what are you talking about? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like I actually heard this today. A guy came to the event today and said, actually, I've had some great conversations with smaller chapters, because they actually had a genuine conversation with me. I could tell they liked each other, and there was immediate opportunities for leadership opportunities right
Mm-hmm.
away, compared to
Mm-hmm.
compared to a big chapter. He's like, I walked into XYZ big chapters, and they didn't talk to me, or they literally, this P&M said to me, he's like, I could tell they didn't like each other, or they didn't even know each other. And I was like, oh wow, that's some insightful commentary, reflection from someone who's literally hasn't even started school yet at the University of Tennessee, right? So
Yeah.
I'll turn it over back to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one example that comes to mind, I was working with the chapter, and I was at their first week of formal recruitment, or at least what the campus deemed formal recruitment. And we'll talk a little bit about myths and barriers in recruitment there. Um, and that was the first, and they had smaller chapter, they had struggled with recruitment, and we were going through a recruitment training. And so the, um, one of the older members essentially was like, none of this is going to work. We're a smaller chapter, very coming very much from this deficit recruitment space. And, I think we were able to sit in that space for a little bit and acknowledge, right, the reality of, yes, you are correct that smaller chapter, things that we might be talking about or things that, you may have thought you did, didn't work. And I think that's where we were able to uncover some things in terms of, did you really do what we're talking about? And, having the realization that probably not, or not to the level. And then having some other members, because of other conversations that were had prior to this meeting, say, hey, like, we're going to try this, and going into, hey, what's our list? You're getting on Snapchat, getting all your guys. We're having this event. We're reaching out. Hey, we're going to meet tomorrow night and call people and text people and do all these things. And they recruited 14 guys that fall, which was the largest recruitment they had in probably 2 or 3 years. And that essentially took their chapter from about 20-ish up to like mid to high 30s. And so they felt some of that energy. And then it showed, hey, if we actually do what we're supposed to do, and we acknowledge that we're smaller internally, we acknowledge that certain things weren't working, but we weren't going to bring that into conversation. We actually can now build really, really good relationships. And to Dominic's point, like, if you're talking to the amount of guys that you should be talking to, you are bound to find individuals who want an experience that might be a little bit smaller, right? Like, it's at some level sometimes how expansions are really successful. You get guys who are like, I don't want that big experience, or I want to become a leader pretty quickly, or I want to get involved, or I do enjoy the genuine connection. And so if you're focusing on not coming from it as an apology, but more of like, here's the vision and opportunity that DU at X campus provides. In Dominic's case, like, here's what DU at Tennessee provides. That guy's going to be really excited for it, right? And if that guy is really excited for it, he may be, and if there's 1,200 other guys at Tennessee, he might be going telling all his buddies, hey, like, you should check out DU, you should check out DU, instead of, man, that was really awkward. They apologized. First thing he did was apologize to me for being a smaller chapter, which some PNMs would have no idea that you were a smaller chapter anyways until you brought it up, right? So my experience, as Dominic, you were talking, very clear experience. I can remember that week and being really excited for the chapter when they were like, hey, we're already at 10 new members, right? 10 PNMs have accepted bids. And they were seeing that effort and kind of that mindset actually be rewarded.
Do you want to talk about myths and barriers?
Sure. Yeah. This is another one we see a lot in recruitment. We talked about this a little bit, is this idea that chapters will put self-imposed barriers on themselves when it comes to recruitment, or there's these like myths that they talk about that aren't actually true. Obviously, it's a myth. IFC doesn't allow for us to give bids before bid day, right? They heard that somewhere. That may have been the policy 2 years ago, and that's changed. But if you really like ask them, show me where the policy is, or they follow up with the FSL director or office or IFC VP of recruitment or IFC recruitment guy, they're like, well, no, you can give bids kind of whenever, right? Like, we've just kind of created this day, right? And so I was working with the chapter earlier this year where they had that thought. That I was in a conversation with them, and they said, oh, well, we can't give bids out, and we don't want to give bids out till bid day. And I was like, well, is that a rule, or is that something you think? And it was kind of both, and instead of like, it's something we think and something we want to do, I said, I think you're putting a barrier on yourself, and I don't believe that to be the case on your campus. And he followed up and was like, you're right, that wasn't the case. And within, the next 48 hours, they had 9 bids out, right? Like, instead of waiting a whole another week and a half to extend those bids. So they're putting these barriers on themselves there, right? And so I think that is not helpful to chapters, right? Or, oh, we can't, IFC's telling us we can't do X, right? We can't talk to guys. It's like, okay, well, let's actually dive deeper into like what that actually means, and what we can and can't do, right? Oh, they won't allow for us to, collect information at a table. Like, they kind of have to do that. It's like, okay, let's now again is that a barrier? Is that a myth? Have we actually followed up on that? Is that something you're hearing from the chapter next to you, who heard from like the chapter before them, who heard from, somebody that graduated 2 years ago? Like, are we actually following up on these kind of myths and barriers? So I think it's really, really important to like ask the question, like if it's not making sense or you feel like it's preventing you from being successful in recruitment, like follow up on it respectfully and professionally and in a mature way with within your chapter, your advisor, the FSL office, and then ultimately like Dominic, Chris, like people at IHQ who might say, "Oh, we know a little bit more. Like that doesn't seem right." Right? It's like the amount of times that Dominic could probably fielded those questions and then been able to be like, "Hold on, like let me see what's going on here, or let me try to get some more context to this." And then you're able to have a good conversation. Um, you know, I know Dominic has those experiences. I do, right? And I think ultimately it's like, hey, if we're coming from a place of if we're successful in recruitment, that makes the community successful. Let's have that conversation on, is that a myth? Does that actually make sense? Are we putting that barrier on ourselves? All of those pieces. The other barrier I see, and I've had to get chapters to get out of this mindset at some level, is in order to get a bid, they have to talk to every single member in the chapter, right? And you're like, you're now putting a barrier and providing an experience that's not great, right? That's not to say that they shouldn't talk to and know most of the guys, but how are you expected if you're a chapter of 40 that this guy has to meet with every single one and have this conversation and every single guy has to say yes and all of these things? Like you're putting pieces into place that are preventing you from actually moving forward with recruitment. Or I was
Yeah.
working with the chapter who the P&M had to come in front of the entire chapter at a meeting and like essentially present a case and answer questions. And I was like, how would you feel if you're a P&M having to do that in front of like 40 guys as an 18-year-old? And the chapter was like, yeah, that makes sense. And they changed that and they saw, you know, a little bit of spike in the recruitment numbers because like that's a barrier they're putting into place there, or just not a best recruitment practice. So
Yeah.
I think just being honest with yourself, like, what are we doing that's actually hindering us? And are we doing that because we that's what we've put on ourselves, or we think we're supposed to be doing this, but we're not really sure?
Yeah, I just following up with the barrier piece, Hayden. I think other examples have been they have to attend 4 events or 6 events before they get a bid, right? Or I think the conversations around how many people this P&M needs to meet to be able to get a bid. I just think without going into full, I could talk for an hour about this, is making sure that your recruitment, whatever's in your bylaws about recruitment, about membership selection process, it is flexible, it is nimble, that we have the ability, if there's a mutual thing where let's just say you have a legacy or you have someone who is like, hey, he went to high school with 5 guys in the chapter. He wants to join DU. Do you still need to make him go through all these hoops to get a bid, right? If the campus is saying you can give him a bid, why put that person in these things? I just think some chapters have just so overly complicated bidding processes and membership selection processes that I think we had almost like a half a session about this last year during Amplify, just talking about some specific examples. So just make sure that you go back, look at your bylaws, making sure that you have the ability. Is it something where a recruitment committee can just give out bids because you elect these people or appoint these people, or does everyone have to? If there's a complicated, hour-long process every night or 3-4 hour-long process to decide who the chapter is going to give a bid to, I would take a hard look at that. I just don't think it's necessary. And like I said, I could go on for hours about this, but I think it's really important to take a hard look at if you think it's annoying and complicated, it probably is. So I think if you need some ideas on how to uncomplicate the process, please reach out to Hayden and I. I think there's we can at least share some examples or models where the process can just be a lot more nimble and quick and easy. The other quick thing about myths and barriers would be just chapters who put caps on themselves. A mythical, we're only going to give out 20 bids this year, period. They could give out 23, but they won't because, I completely understand. There's some chapters that recruit based off of bed spaces. So I totally get it. I'm talking more chapters who create these mythical caps because that's what they did last year, and that's just what they're going to do. And they don't want to go above and beyond. We're not saying that you need to give out 100 bids every year, right? We're not telling you need to have. I'm sure some of our higher ups would love every chapter to have 150 man associate member classes. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is be flexible, be nimble, and if you meet amazing guys that meet our criteria, then not putting mythical caps on your associate member classes, because I think some chapters also get caught up that they're like, well, yeah, there was 6 other guys that like really hit the criteria and they wanted to join DU, but we're going to be really selective because so it doesn't look like we're trying too hard, and we're gonna cut people because we don't want to look like we're desperate and giving up too many bids. So that's my soapbox moment of the evening.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the last thing on the myths that I see are the chapters who are like, oh, we can't go beyond a certain time because we need so much time for associate member education. It if the extra 2 weeks is going to yield you 7 more guys, and you tell Dominic, Noah, Chris, anyone, I'd be surprised if they looked at you and said, we can't figure out how to like figure this out from an associate member education standpoint if that means 7 more guys can join the organization, right? So I've seen chapters who are like, hey, we have to stop it here because there's a hard, and this is like not with IFC stuff, because I do know some campuses have some hard pieces there. This is like, again, a myth that you have to do it, or you're, again, putting a barrier on yourself. But I have seen chapters who have said, nope, we are extending it by another 10 days. They've communicated that with headquarters, and they're like, yep, that works for us. Like, here's how that would kind of play out. And in those 10 days, they've gotten 7 to 10 more guys, right? Because they needed that extra time, because recruitment is relationship building. And so they just needed that extra time to do that, right? Or the other one that always taught me when I was an undergrad is, oh, we can't recruit in the spring, or if you're quarter school, the winter, because just nobody does, right? Nobody does it, or we're only going to get a couple guys. Some of our best guys were winter quarter recruits who we communicated with them. You will go through the AME process with our spring guys, but you're ready to kind of be locked in now. And it's like, cool, I got, 4 to 5 of you to lock in the winter. I'm going to take that, right? Same thing of like, I've seen groups who are like, hey, we really focused on spring recruitment and we got 7 really, really solid guys, even though spring's not a huge time, right? It's this myth of like, oh, spring's not a great recruitment period. Like, but nobody's ever really tried to do it. And so, Dominic, I know, is a product of not a fall recruitment, right? He's a product of a year-round recruitment. Yep. But there are guys who will wait. And if the chapters come in and say we're recruiting now, they can get some good guys. Not only good guys, but also a good amount of guys, because they put effort into that.
Yeah. No, I was a product of summer recruitment, and then my parents slammed the brakes on me. And so I had parent mandated deferred recruitment. So I joined in the winter quarter. So Hayden mentioned, and it was a great experience. So, I think I said it just don't, like I said, don't get stuck in what you've done in the past, or I think some chapters often just hit autopilot when it comes to the bidding or membership selection process. So let us know how we can be helpful. We can coach you or talk you through, or if this needs to be a bylaw change within your chapter, that's definitely something that staff members can assist you in that process. So anything else?
I don't think so.
Okay, no. Perfect. All right, we're gonna go through. So we're gonna do some like a lightning round. So what we're gonna do is recap the 3 breakout sessions that happened on Saturday afternoon of LI. So I know Hayden led one of these sessions, and as well as Jacob Ellis led one and Mark Yerke led one. But we're just going to do the high level things to think about. If you would like some of these, I do have the facilitation materials for these activities. So please email me after, and I can send some of this information to you. Excuse me. So obviously, just want to cover Hayden fill in.
This is the one I did, Dominic.
Oh, perfect,
Yeah.
perfect.
So, and I would probably add for timing, I think
Yeah.
we covered almost all of this. I
Yeah.
think the only thing we didn't is the bullet point number 4. Strongly encourage chapters to diversify where your events are and the locations of them. I've seen a lot of success with chapters, myself included, when I was an undergrad, is having events where a lot of like first year students are going to be
Yep.
early on, because it's like if I'm doing something, I can pull in a lot of students, right? Plus, it just is nice to diversify where that's at. Also, groups with chapter houses, it can break the ice a little bit if that first event isn't, I've got to go knock at the door at a chapter house, but more so maybe something on campus in a space where like you can continue to pull guys in. So I think
Yep.
that's just a recommendation, but really everything else we've covered, I think,
Yeah,
on this slide.
I think it's also just to keep recruitment interesting. This has been a key topic we've talked about a lot in the last 2 years about member engagement post-COVID, of guys wanting to be excited about going to recruitment. If you diversify your recruitment events and try new things, do new things, it's going to be a much bigger carrot to get current members of your chapter to show up to your recruitment events. While recruitment should be mandatory, no, sorry, shouldn't have to be mandatory because everyone wants to be there. Many chapters are struggling with member engagement in the recruitment process. So diversify the events, try new events, just try new things. Ask the guys what they want to do in the recruitment process. That's going to make it fun, entertaining. As we mentioned before, there's some events that work for your chapter, and then there's other events that, like, hey, I think Hayden, and I know you probably you did this when you were in school. We did this when I was in school. We would do a reflection piece, some type of way to event evaluation, to be able to say, like, did that event work? Did it not work? This is how we should tweak the event. So just really making sure you're not just hitting autopilot for recruitment every year, right? So how are you making the necessary tweaks for events, for how you're preparing guys? How are we engaging? All of those things need to be tweaked, and whether it be fall or spring, because I've learned a lot from Tennessee. So Tennessee, we went in with a game plan in January, even though fall recruitment's a lot bigger, but they already had laid the groundwork of how do we crank this up to make it bigger for a bigger and more amount of people going through recruitment in the fall, right? So just continue to tweak, evaluate, and figure out if the event didn't work, if you all hated the event, why are you doing it again, right? That's all I'll say. Okay, let's talk about the other thing. So making a personal connection, we've talked a lot about this too. And this was a big part of the conversation last week when we in the Amplify session, is how do we make sure that guys can articulate their DUI? Why did they join? Why was it about you? Why did they join? What did they look for? Even having guys share their personal recruitment journey, whatever that looks like for you, is having guys articulate what their DUI is, why they're there. Not only why they joined, but why they're there, right? What are they getting out of the fraternity experience? That can translate into brainstorming ideas of the top reasons to join your chapter, right? So the difference between joining the Oregon chapter versus Purdue versus Kansas State versus San Jose State is going to be different, right? But sometimes you really need to, as an advisor or as a VP recruitment, really push them to really think about why someone would join their chapter and what are the things that people love about the chapter, right? What are when it comes to brotherhood events, when it comes to traditions that the chapter has, right? What are those things that are really unique about your chapter, right? Because I think, yes, we have some unique parts of DU, right? It's the non-secrecy piece, right? That's a big reason. Honestly, that was one of the reasons why I joined DU, because that was something unique. My parents were freaked out about me joining a fraternity. But the non-secrecy piece was something that eased their minds. That I was like, did they come to my initiation? No. But the fact that all that stuff was on the website and they had the ability to look into the fraternity, that made them made them calm down, right, about the whole experience, right? So think about not only the international things, right, but how do we make sure that if we're brainstorming ideas, that if you're asking your chapter members for specific reasons why they joined, to get as specific as possible. You can say brotherhood, you can say but what about the brotherhood, right? What specific examples can you give to make sure that guys really can share stories and make this individually personal? Everyone's going to have their own DUI, but people are also going to have their reasons why they joined DU, right? And what are the things that really stick out to them that are really highlights, right? You want to make sure that you're working on, Hayden talked about this too, making sure the chapter knows what questions to ask, what questions not to ask. And just being able to be prepared to answer tough questions, right? What does it look like? There are going to be a lot of barriers and reasons why people might give you an excuse, right? You hear this a lot in recruitment. Oh, I don't think I can afford it. Oh, I'm worried, I'm worried about my grades. My parents won't join, right? So how are you prepared to just be like, oh, sorry, well, that sucks, and then just move on, right? So there's always ways that you can talk through things. Yes, there might be some super complicated questions, but it might be something where that guy might not join in the fall, but he might join in the spring, right? But another thing is you could potentially work through and talk through payment plans. You can talk through academic success plans, right? What does that look like for you all to really be prepared to answer those tough questions and making sure that those barriers that we talked about, that often chapters are like, oh, well, this guy is a pretty big reason why he can't join. So, oh, well, we're just going to move on. But how can you work through some of those issues? Because he's going to be a good member. Anything else to add on this stuff here?
Nope. I think you hit it all.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And 365, Hayden and I have done specific sessions just on 365 continuous recruitment beyond just the formal processes. I'm using air quotes, but what does that look like? Formal fall recruitment, formal spring recruitment. We've talked a lot about developing that plan. I'm just going to flip over the slide real quick and I'll flip back. Many of you have seen these slides before. There's 5 zones for semester school, 6 zones if you're a quarter system school, but what does it look like to, we are moved into early fall. So a couple weeks ago, some of you might still be in the summer zone too. If you're Cal Poly, Oregon State, Washington, you're still going to be in the summer zone. But what does it look like for you all to really plan out? What is it going into the fall? But beyond that, what does it look like beyond formal recruitment? And I talked about a little bit about this 2 weeks ago, is making sure that people are prepared. If your recruitment VP is so burned out because fall recruitment just took it out of him, those 4 days really took it out of him, and he doesn't want to do anything with recruitment the rest of the semester, replace him, have other people of the recruitment committee step up to make sure that they are prepared to take on those informal recruitment processes, right? So I think a significant part of that is developing that plan, that year-round plan. And that plan could involve, what does it look like to engage your brand new associate members in the recruitment process? What does it look like to ask them who their friends are, who are their roommates, who lives on their floor, who are in their classes? What does that look like to develop a plan that really the formal versus informal approach can really look like? Informal can really be all those brotherhood events that you can invite. So a brotherhood movie night might not be the best night to invite a P&M to, but if you're having a video game tournament or you're doing a dodgeball tournament, whatever kind of, a lot of chapters love basketball, right? You're having a little basketball tournament, 3-on-3 tournament at the house. Like, what does it look like for you to invite potential new members, that you develop that list from your brand new associate members and you continue to build your list? So you are really building, whether they join in the fall or they join in the spring, you're looking at the long game to make sure that they are ready to join. And like I said, being very strategic and thoughtful in everything you do when it comes to what types of events you hold for informal recruitment. What does it look like to have the right people there? We talked about getting seniors involved. What does it look like to who's involved in the formal process? It doesn't have to be the entire chapter, but I've also learned in a lot of chapters, once you don't call an event a recruitment event, suddenly the pressure, the anxiety, everything kind of goes away. And if you're just hanging out as a fraternity, you're just doing normal every day, the day in the life of you're working out, you're studying together, that could be a way to invite potential new members to the house, or go study in the library with you all. So these are the things that thinking about the long-term plan. And we'll do another 365 webinar, but I do recommend, if you look at last summer's webinars, there's about an hour-long session specifically on 365 where we walk through every zone and really like what specifically you need to think about for every zone. It's super helpful. Hayden, anything else?
No, I think your point about the VP of recruitment is huge, and I will echo that continuously, because the amount of times, and you all probably have seen it, recruitment ends, you get to the next meeting, exec board does their updates, and the VP of recruitment says, no updates for me, recruitment's over, and then sits there for the next month and a half, and nothing is happening to prepare for the next cycle. That is far too common, and like we want to prepare for that next cycle. And if that means that VP of recruitment, thank you for your time here, we're going to move and start putting somebody else in that position. I echo what Dominic said, make that happen.
I don't think it's a bad idea. I said this last year in my soapbox moment. I think, Hayden, you probably remember this. That I said, if that person's burned out, move up the election for your recruitment chair. And if the recruitment chair is on a little bit different election cycle than the rest of the exec board, that's fine, right? If that person gets elected in late September, so that person has the fall to prepare to cultivate the spring class, but also, so that person has time and energy. So he is not starting on January 1st, right? I get really afraid when chapters have elections in like early December or right before finals in December, and then that person is expected to run the spring formal recruitment process literally a month later, and they have no preparation and no transition, right? So just something to think about. That happens too often. And this is why also my other soapbox moment is I've always said that I think chapters should start moving to a 2 VP recruitment model, or having, whatever, be a VP recruitment and associate VP recruitment, whatever that looks like, a person, a captain and a deputy, whatever you want to call it, whatever analogies you want to use, but just something to think about. I've seen more and more issues, especially post COVID, that has become an issue, where one person, you put all the pressure on one person, and then honestly, in this world where we talk a lot about mental health, sometimes that pressure can be too much and that person quits, right? The person's like, I don't have time, I don't have energy, I can't deal with the pressure, and then you're stuck with no VP recruitment. So just something to think about. But I want you all to especially for the advisors on the call too, I think it's important to talk to your chapters of making sure that either they're having that election earlier, or making sure that the current VP recruitment knows that he or they have jobs until the end of the semester, and making sure that they're preparing the chapter for the next semester or the next exam. So perfect. All right. So real quick, those of you that did go to LI, you were provided a worksheet. A lot of the worksheet really was talking about, if you don't have specific pre-designed roles and responsibilities for recruitment, making sure you design how many people are on your recruitment committee, what are they doing, how do you create job descriptions for these people? I think it's really important to think about, like, how do you divide it up? I think I talked about this 2 sessions ago about a social media person on your recruitment committee, someone who does logistics, like picks up the water. Like literally today, I went on 2 water runs because it was 90-something degrees in Tennessee. I took that on as the headquarters person in town, but if I wasn't there, who was going to do that, right? So who's going to do the logistics piece? Who's going to go pick up the pizzas tomorrow? What does that look like for you all? But making sure that people have different roles. And Hayden already talked about, like, not everyone has to be primary recruiters, but everyone can be there and serve a role in the chapter. We talked about, like, hook activities would be, what are your signature events? What are the events that you think are the most popular? The events that guys get excited about, the things that might be those hook events that are really going to not only got members, guys in the chapter excited, but also they're going to be the things that might yield the most P&Ms, or like a P&M might go to this event like, hey, the Oregon chapter, I'm just going to use our old summer recruitment model, Hayden, but the Oregon chapter took guys jet skiing on the lake, right? Great. But that event was so popular that if you look at, when you go back and ask the P&Ms, this is something my chapter always did when I was in school well before Hayden was at Oregon, was we'd ask the new associate members, reflect on what events did you like, what did you not like, right? And we would ask them and they would tell us, and that was some of the reflection piece of realizing, with like all 12 of them said that the best event was A, then we need to make sure we're doing that event again, right? We also would ask them, like, what are events that you really liked that other chapters did, right? They might have checked out other fraternities, like asking them what they also did. It's not a bad idea to learn from what our competitors are doing and our peers are doing, to make sure that we can, hey, that's a great idea, we can actually probably make that event better. So whatever that looks like for you is just being really strategic with that. Once again, I mentioned before, planning for fall and beyond. What is your early fall? If we go back to this zone, what is your early fall plan? And what is your mid to late fall plan? And how do you make sure I realize it's only August, but how are you also really even just preparing for what is the beginning of spring semester going to look like for y'all if you're on the semester model? So just something to think about. That worksheet, if you need that worksheet again, or if the advisors would like any of these facilitation materials, I can send any of this stuff to you all, but just let me know, just as you're following up on things specifically from LI. I do want to remind everyone that the photos from LI, if you went to Leadership Institute, if you go on the DU website on deltau.org and you go to the LI, so /LI, there's a tab, a yellow tab that says LI 2024 photos. It's from our Flickr account. Feel free to use any of that for your social media, for recruitment videos, creating content, whatever that looks like for you. George, so most of those photos are from George, who's the DU brother from Fresno State that was taking photos. So please use those. We just got them. I think we just got them on Friday. So they're up on our website. So please use those accordingly. Also, I think I mentioned this before too, is on the DU website. If you go to the DU website and then the drop-down menu is programs, you'll see recruitment programming. And we have a couple things. Not only do we have our previous training webinars from the last, going back to 2021 when Hayden started Amplify, we also have a specific recruitment toolkit that really helps chapters. Specifically, you can go into Canva, which is a platform to create recruitment materials. You can go in there. We have templates. So if you're looking for templates for social media templates, for specifically recruitment, like the recruitment schedule, or if you want to be able to post things on anything specifically design tools that are very, very, very easy to use, because we literally have the templates in there that you just literally plug in your chapter's information and what you're looking for, and then you can use all that stuff. So all that stuff is free. You just need to create a Canva account, but there's a lot of really cool things in the recruitment toolkit. So it's in the recruitment programming section, but I highly, highly recommend taking a look at that stuff, because it's new resources that our comms team is really trying to focus on creating at least as many resources as possible for chapters. But I think it's an underutilized tool that just got launched in the spring. So perfect. All right, questions for us, for Hayden or I. So I put on here coaching, virtual coaching. Myself and Hayden and other staff members can participate in virtual coaching. If you just want to run some ideas by us, we can also schedule specific recruitment visits. Good examples. Shane was on the call earlier. I'm going to San Jose State next week. I'm going to be able to help San Jose State's exec board and Shane specifically on planning the best recruitment possible right when they get off started. And also we do offer recruitment focused building better men retreat. So if you think, if recruitment is probably your biggest need, we can have a specific one of either staff facilitator or volunteer facilitator, like someone like Hayden, come out and specifically do a building better men retreat around recruitment goals, everything we just talked about. But often it's better to sometimes to have an outside facilitator come in and just get the chapter talking and get everyone on the same page of what you're looking for, what you want to do, and having the most successful recruitment possible. So my email's up there, my cell phone's on there as well. So if you want to text me, last week I got a bunch of texts and emails asking for the PowerPoint slides and whatnot. So, but yeah, I am going to stop recording.